All right. So tonight, we weren't going to be able to do it on Collaborate because I've got like three different slide decks, three different PowerPoint presentations to go through, and Collaborate will collapse, and we'll end up more time doing admin stuff than we will doing the lecture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present all the material. We're going to do a test review, which will probably be a separate lecture again. And then on Thursday night at 6 o'clock, and again, this is completely optional, but it'll kind of be like office hours type thing, where if anybody has any questions regarding the exam, you can wait till Thursday. I'm going to go ahead and open up the exam tomorrow night. Again, you're going to need a password because you're also going to need the attachment. So that worked pretty well last time. I didn't get any frantic, people opening up the exam and realizing they didn't have the attachment and causing problems. So, causing problems for themselves, not so much a problem for me. Not a whole lot of stress, but I know some people when they get locked out of the exam, yeah, it's pretty stressful. So, what we're going to do is we actually, as you know, had some slides left over from last week, and it was on supply chain management, which is pretty important stuff. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to jump into inventory, which sounds kind of like the same thing, but it's not. It's related. And then we're going to talk about some more planning type stuff. And then I'll probably close that out, put that on YouTube, and then right after that, put up a bit of a test review. So, like I say, the test will be up tomorrow night. So I'm recording this actually Monday night. So Tuesday night at 6 p.m.-ish, 6 or 7 p.m. Yeah, I actually have it for 7. You'll be able to open that. It'll be available to you. And you'll have a whole week to take it, so no rush. And if you have questions or something like that, then, it'd behoove you to wait till Thursday, sort out whatever's going on, or at least study more for it. You'll have all the way till next Tuesday to get that done. Also, that the homework is turned into one big assignment this time, just prior to you taking the exam. So that should hopefully be a little simpler as well. All right, so jumping back in, logistics management. We talked about a bunch of other stuff on logistics. This thing doesn't want to back up right now. Always problems. Anyway, it doesn't want to do anything. There we go. Okay, so logistics management, we talked about some of the stuff. This was the previous slide about e-procurement, online auctions, all that other stuff. I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know as much about this stuff as I do, and obviously far more than the authors. But there are some things in logistics management that have changed a bit. Objective to obtain efficient operations, frequent candidate for outsourcing. So, you do have companies, and they can be the big boys like FedEx or UPS or somebody, or even a private, local type thing that wants to get involved and take care of your logistics. And, the model for doing things like payroll and for doing legal and for doing other things where you farm that out isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's done efficiently and done better than you can do it for a good price. You still remain within your core competency in terms of, we'll talk about vertical integration tonight, and vertical integration would be broadening away from your core competency in outsourcing your logistics if it's affordable. And believe me, I've got my real estate license here in Alaska as well. Not as active in it as well, but as much as I used to be. But the Remax was who I was working with, and I think we paid $7 for overnight mail. It wasn't the same price. So when you think, it's prohibitively expensive, if you're doing bulk, if you're doing volume, and if you're dedicated to them, you get a better rate. But as we all know, sometimes you want to ship something to Alaska. The only way they'll do it is UPS because they've got an exclusive agreement with it. And UPS, as you know, is usually prohibitively expensive for us. So anyway, allows a competitive advantage to be gained through reduced costs and improved customer service, which is true. So different forms of, supply, working out a flow through supply chain. Each one has its own benefits, and it depends on the commodity. The deal with trucking is that trucking can go largely from door to door, and so they also, if you ask the railroads, they also don't pay the full amount of taxes as they drive on the same roads we do, whereas the railroads have to maintain their road bed. So, there's a little competition there. Some of the hybrid methods where you put the piggybacks onto the trucks, onto the rail cars, that can work as well. Railroads, they carry basically heavy stuff. Railroads are in great shape. They were financially struggling, but since we, haven't built an oil pipeline in the Midwest, all that oil is really rejuvenated the railroads, because that's how it's all being shipped. It's all fun and games till one of those things crashes, but oh well. Limited flexibility through containers. So piggybacking, we talked about that. But again, it depends on the commodity. If it's a fluid type thing, it's going to go in a pipe. Obviously, that's the most efficient for that type of thing, but you can't, shove corn or something through a pipe. So it depends on the commodity. Air freight is going to be expensive, but it's huge in terms of growth right now. It's gotten less expensive, but again, you're never going to be shipping cheap commodities through there. But fresh flowers, maybe fish. But again, most fish goes frozen anyway, so there's not as much urgency. But anyway, there's certain commodities that will go air freight, and if the consumer's willing to pay for it, more power to them. Waterways, marine type transport is where, if you look at percentage-wise, that's where most of the stuff goes. You can ship stuff incredibly cheap. That would be, very, very expensive. There's always exceptions, and there's different rates, depending on whether you're on the popular part of the route, which would be basically the front haul, or on the unused route, which would be the back haul, or less used route. But, for example, if you're shipping hay to Japan, you can do that for almost nothing, because 2 out of 3 containers going in the direction of Asia are unloaded. But if you're shipping cars to the States from Japan, obviously they're going to pay the full price because there's no excess capacity on that. So a lot to it, but in general, marine is the cheapest way to ship things. If the commodity can go in a pipeline and a pipeline is created, that is more secure, far less chance of accidents, and very efficient. And then multimodal, where things are going to ship from one to another. Obviously, if you're getting something air freight, it's not flying to your home, and if you're shipping something by railroad, eventually it's going to go on a truck, or perhaps it could go to a factory that's got a, railroad access, but most of the time things are going to go multimodal. Faster shipping, generally more expensive, nothing you don't know. Faster methods involve small shipment sizes, while slow methods involve large shipment sizes. And there's a whole group of folks. I do a lot of business that goes LTL, but lately I've been buying the whole container because it is cheaper, to pay for the whole container. You get these freight consolidators that break up individual customers, fill up a container, and basically resell that container over and over again. If you do an LTL type shipment, it's roughly twice as much as if you bought the whole container. So I've been doing the full containers of late. Warehousing. The problem with warehousing is, number one, you're carrying inventory, and inventory is generally a bad thing. Inventory doesn't do much for you in terms of it. There's so many downsides to it in terms of obsolescence, the fact that you bought in bulk and it may be going obsolete. It's you're paying for this warehouse. And also, if you want to use any just-in-time type methods or continuous improvement, it's pretty tough to do when you've got a huge supply. But anyway, warehousing, fundamental purpose, store goods and services, and, consolidation, break bulk, which means where they, break a huge shipment down into smaller items. Cross-docking, which really isn't warehousing. Cross-docking, it comes in one side of they usually call this a distribution center, and out the other side, you try not to actually put it into storage, because that just wastes time, costs money. In order to do cross-docking, you've got to rely on things like RFID tags and other methods to have a pretty good insight on what's coming in. Channel assembly, we don't talk about that much, but channel assembly, if you're ever buying, like, a good example is large appliances. Go get parts for whatever, a Maytag, a Whirlpool, a Hotpoint, a GE, and you'll find out that, hey, these parts are all pretty much the same, because there's different labels just slapped on the outside of that equipment. So there's a couple, 3 different, big manufacturers But Kenmore and all these, sort of house brands, and even some of the other ones are no different. Tires are the same way. A few big tire manufacturers, because the infrastructure is just so huge that it doesn't make sense to do that. But they still want to take advantage of the individual brands, so they'll set up a channel assembly. The things come down the line, different labels, maybe different attributes on different products, but largely the same product. Third-party logistics. So I talked about this. This is outsourcing logistics. They can do all sorts of things for you, especially if you're dealing with customs and stuff. Do you want to have somebody overseas to take care of this? I did overnight mail from Turkey one time. It took 4 days. And it was, I think we had to use DHL. It cost me $50-some. But again, it has to be done. But if I tried to do that through the conventional Turkish post, the US post, it would have been a nightmare. You need somebody who's familiar with, and has the ability and the infrastructure to have somebody for it. And they do a lot of shipments, so they get the economies of scale. Distribution management. So rapid response, product choice, service. So again, this is all, from the eye of the customer. This is having this sorted out, being able to provide all this choice and service and response is important to the customer, and they will go other places if that's not done. So number of facilities, lowest cost, whole logistics, facility costs. Obviously what they're saying is that things are going to get a bit more expensive. There will be a sweet spot there as opposed on the cost, but again, there's some adjustments that need to be made based upon the inventory, the facility, and the transportation. So distribution management. So obviously the goal there is that max profit. You're going to come up with a certain number of facilities that are going to sort that out, and this will be your decision. And again, it'll be sort of a make-buy decision. Do we make it internally, or do we basically buy the third-party logistics to work that out? Distribution management, facilities, packaging, logistics, selection, development, retailers, and downstream management. So you get a lot of companies like. It's not so prevalent up here because, Alaska is kind of its own thing. Alaska, though, is the sort of the distribution hub. Well, not just sort of, is the distribution hub for the rest of Alaska. But you'll also run into this in places like Reno, Nevada, where Nevada has very low taxes and California has very high taxes. So a lot of places in proximity to Nevada will rely on those areas to do all their warehousing and all those items. So all the big, Amazon, for example, has their huge place up in Reno, and other big distribution centers are up in that area, and it's their own sort of business. But they can set all this up. They specialize in distribution. That's they aren't really doing any manufacturing there. They're just doing the distribution. And again, they're careful not to call it warehousing, because that's really not the business they want to be in. Even in a low tax state. Holding product and holding large sums of inventory is not good. You want to be just in time, where you're getting the product just as it's being required, just as it's being pulled through the system. Sustainability in supply chains. Yeah, there is a certain amount of, actually some of this is kind of eyewash, because for example, recycling electronics, there may be a small niche for it. This will probably expand in the future, because again, a lot of those elements, a lot of those, even some of the rare earth kind of things, and some of the other materials, the metals in computers and things, they're not the best to go in the landfill, and there is some value to them. So you will see this develop where things end up in a reverse supply chain. And then other items, recycling, especially where it's subsidized, or even the disposal, you want to be careful, again, where some of those items end up. And then closed loop supply chain, proactive design, prepares and returns product for introduction. So again, some supply chains do have this cyclical nature to them, where they're actually in a loop rather than just in one direction. Sustainability in supply chain. So again, the different attributes they show. Forecasting, again, there's not a big reverse logistics component to that. Product quality for logistics is uniform, non-uniform for returns. Product packaging, yeah, reverse logistics would be things that come back damaged. Pricing, again, a little more complex. Speed, sometimes not necessarily a priority for in the return side. You don't need to use overnight mail to return a broken phone to to Apple. Distribution costs, the costs are there, but again, if you can minimize if you can automate it, where they send you a mailer and it's fairly painless for everybody. It goes into the preferred channel. Nobody's seeking reimbursement and all the rest of this. You just give them a mailer and it's done with. And then inventory management, again, they have it labeled as not consistent because it's going to be different than your standard supply chain. Measuring supply chain performance. So what they're talking about here is just like the formula shows. You get the assets and you divide that into the inventory investment, and that'll give you that percentage invested in inventory. So again, ideally, you don't want as much invested in inventory. You want to keep inventory numbers to a minimum. But then the number they use, or the example they use, is Home Depot. Well, Home Depot is, essentially a parts store. They have to have a wide variety. You don't want to go in Home Depot in most cases and put something on order. I mean, if the sink is broken, if the plumbing product is whatever, if the outlet goes bad, you're not in a situation. So they in their business model are going to have to carry more inventory than, say, a restaurant or somebody who's selling something consistent, and they don't have to. They have control of their inventory. They can reduce the menu to reduce the amount of items that they have. So you're going to see, again, a restaurant like McDonald's, not a whole lot of inputs there, not a whole lot of money tied up in inventory, and then you can see McDonald's is quite high. Coca-Cola, again, there may be other strategies at work here. When Coca-Cola, their exchange is quite high, but sometimes you will see companies that deal with commodities like sugar or airlines with fuel, and they'll try and buy those things at the lowest price possible, and that gets into futures markets and other things that are kind of beyond the scope of this class. But obviously, jet fuel doesn't necessarily go obsolete. Sugar is pretty much sugar, but again, it depends on the storage cost. Pilferage, probably not going to happen with those commodities. So warehousing, putting it in a tank, that's fairly simple. Not a lot to do with inventory. So anyway, it depends on the situation for the individual product. Inventory turnover, so cost of goods sold divided by inventory investment. That equals the inventory turnover. So average inventory over several periods, divided by 2, and gives you the ending inventory. So here's just an example. Obviously these are in millions. So net revenue 32 million, cost of goods sold 14.2, and then all their figures. So total inventory investment is the 1.69. So anyway, you would expect them to turn over their inventory fairly rapidly, and at this time they're showing 8.4 times. Something like McDonald's, again, perishable type stuff, they're going to turn it 112 times. Dell, very agile, trying to do just in time, trying to flip stuff quickly, so 90 times. Other items, like again, Home Depot, they've got a lot of stuff. They've got to keep their racks full, and it's, they're not going to sell every little washer and nut every day. But again, they have to keep that stuff in stock to keep their customers happy. Supply chain performance, weeks of supply. So now again, on the exam, if there's going to be any formulas or anything like that, I will have the example of the formula. So you won't have to necessarily, well, you won't have to memorize formulas. It's more important just to kind of, keep track of the concepts and how they work. And if given the numbers in a formula, you should be able to work that out. So weeks of supply. So anyway, cost of goods sold divided by the number of weeks. So that's going to give you a weekly supply. So you divide that by the inventory investment, and there you are. So now we're dealing up in the billions, 1.69 billion. And average weekly cost of goods sold, 14.2 billion. Weeks of supply, 6.91 weeks. So again, there's not too much involved here. It's more or less just straight math. Benchmarking the supply chain. Again, you're familiar with benchmarking. It's basically where you look at whatever process is the best in the industry and you try and replicate that. It may be your own process where, okay, then, if you truly determine you're the best, then you're just trying to improve your process. But if you're, say, FedEx and you find that UPS is doing it better, then you try and mirror them and actually improve upon them. So, but for benchmark firms, they're going to have that order fill rate of 98% versus 71% for the other guys. Order fulfillment, again, quite a bit shorter. Cash cycle time, quicker. And inventory, days of supplies, again, they're not holding as much. And, if you're, say, Best Buy in your Circuit City, and there's only room for one of these companies, a lot of Circuit City's problems, if you read up on it, can be traced back to their supply chain. If you've got an 8 gigabyte, memory stick, well, that was a big deal a few years ago. Now, the value of your inventory is being reduced just because those products are going obsolete. So, especially in technology, that is a bad idea to be holding inventory. So benchmarking, yeah, useful. May not be adequate, yeah. Yep, and the whole mutual trust bit. We'll get more into mutual trust too when we talk more about suppliers. When it works back and forth between the vendors, and say if you're, a retailer, if you've got a good relationship with your vendor, probably the best example is actually back to Toyota again. If Toyota cooperates quite a bit with their vendors. In fact, if you look at their actual facilities, their facilities are quite large. I mean, it's a big, huge campus, but the Toyota portion of that is actually pretty small. Their factories are kind of in the center, and then out around their campus are all their vendors. And so, they're literally on site, and they have access to some of the Toyota forecast data. So that would be very useful to, say, Nissan or somebody like that, but there's a trust relationship where at least, that vendor that's on site doesn't share that with the competitors. So, bullwhip effect, I just put this in here just to sort of show, because the book references bullwhip, but they don't really talk about what it is. What happens is, let's say, somebody runs into a store and they're like, yeah, I want 2 purple T-shirts, and then, so that's the customer buying 2 T-shirts, and the retailer's like, wow, what's the deal with purple T-shirts? I better order 10 of them, because people want these things all of a sudden. And let's say you needed them for some, stupid event, some costume party or something, needed a purple T-shirt. I mean, it's a one-off deal. Well, anyway, as that ripples up the supply chain, that small demand signal that you sent for purple T-shirts all of a sudden gets wrapped up and carried away. So the retailer's like, well, I'm going to need 10 of these. And the distributor levels are going, what's going on here? These guys just ordered 10. We haven't sold these in years. So now he wants 20. And the manufacturer's like, wow, I need to, ramp up and produce all these shirts. So all of a sudden, the manufacturer's holding 40 purple shirts and nobody wants them. It was just a blip in the system. And so that's the bullwhip, is a demand signal that's out of the ordinary. It can have a disproportionate effect on the rest of the logistics chain. So we already did that video thing. So that was just the catch-up stuff for last week. And then we're going to move right into, like I said, it's related, but it's not the same. And that would be inventory. So inventory, there's all types of formulas, economic order quantities, and, how to order, and volume discounts, and all the rest of that. But, the modern logic and the companies that are successful, whatever mathematical quantitative answer you come up with, there's still a huge preference, in spite of what those quantitative numbers are telling you, is that less inventory generally makes a company much more profitable. And it's because a lot of these formulas don't necessarily take into account the intangible things, some of the things like continuous improvement, which can't happen if you've got items on the shelf, and they may not capture all of the costs. They may not capture obsolescence and things like that. So anyway, the deal with inventory, why you want a certain amount of inventory, is to decouple processes. So let's say you're manufacturing cars, and you need 3 seats for the production line to keep running, and you only have 2. It's kind of an extreme example. Well, that's a problem. Now you've got a coupling. You've got a coupling between the inventory and that production line, and that's negative. So what you always want is you want enough in inventory where the production process continues unhampered by inventory. But from an inventory standpoint, that's all you want. You just want that safety stock. You don't want excess inventory. You don't want any more than what's needed. But again, you want to have things decoupled. So the objective inventory is strike a balance between inventory investment and customer service. So again, if that production line, like I'm talking about, gets halted, that's where the customer starts getting angry, because now everything's going to be delayed. So the fact that again, from a quality standpoint, the fact that the production line stopped, yeah, that's a problem for the factory, but it's a bigger problem for the customer. It's a problem for the factory because it's a problem for the customers. It's basically what it works down to. One of the most expensive assets, representing 50%, can be. Must balance inventory investment and customer service, so same thing. And here's this bit about decoupling. So decouple or separate various processes of the production process. Take advantage, and so they can use it also when they talk about a selection. If you go into the store and you want whatever item in a large and they don't have it, well, then there's some coupling going on. That should be transparent to you. If they've got something in the store, they should have the full range of sizes you want if inventory is up to speed. Quantity discounts, like I say, most of the time, quantity discounts are a mirage. We all know, we all do this. You go to, in your personal life, you go to Sam's and Costco and you buy the big bulk box, and actually when you do the per unit pricing, it may or may not be a great deal. But the other thing is, you're going to get tired of that product. You're going to throw half of them out. You're going to, there's just not a lot of value at the end of the day, unless it's something you go through, consistently. But in many cases, at least in manufacturing, quantity discounts, the savings are usually not quite there. And what you give up in terms of the ability to change the product, or in the case of some food product, you get the wrong one, or you get the one with, a newer product comes out and you got a whole bunch of these, nasty whatever, and you're stuck with them. So take advantage of quantity discounts, we said, and hedge against inflation. So that hedging against inflation, this can be, definitely with commodities. You get a company like, say, an airline company, Delta or somebody like that. I think Alaska always buys their fuel spot, but I believe Delta does use the futures market, and they will want to sell their tickets for next year. They want to already have those sort of priced out and on the street, and they want to know how much money they're going to make, because they want to be able to really fine-tune their forecast and know what their expenses are going to be. So when fuel prices jump around, that's not good for them. So they will often buy fuel for future delivery. They won't necessarily take it, so it won't go in inventory. But let's say, jet fuel is going for what, $4 a gallon right now, maybe, and they'll say, I will pay, $4.20 a gallon. It's got to be something above market price, usually current market price, to incentivize somebody to invest in it. They'll say, I'll take 1 million gallons of jet fuel for October delivery, and I will pay you, $4.20. And somebody, Chicago Board of Trade type stuff, in the futures market, somebody will jump on that and say, I'll take that bet, basically. And then they're bound to deliver that fuel regardless of the price. If it's traded for $3.50, they're going to make a killing. If it's trading for $5, that investor's got to suck it up. But for Delta, they know that they're going to be paying $4.20 regardless of what happens in the market, so they can, take that out of their pricing equation and come up with a more accurate estimate. So that's what that's all about. Types of inventory: raw material, work in progress, MRO type stuff, maintenance, repair organization, or operating type stuff that's actually in the works or after the works, and then finished goods. So when somebody says it takes 2 weeks or something to produce some product, you usually know that generally things don't take that long. There's a lot of waiting, a lot of time spent in queues and waiting for operators and the rest of it. So what they're showing here is that the cycle time is that 100%, but the actual running part, the actual manipulating that product is only 5%. So this is where process analysis comes in to look and see if that can't be sped up. ABC analysis, pretty important stuff. What you do is you look at the different items. There's a video on this. The Regal Boat and other companies will do this. This is keeping track of your inventory, not necessarily for tax purposes, but just for production type processes, right? And so you don't need to spend the same amount of effort counting everything. Certain things, and again, certain things based upon dollar volumes, not just high price, but based upon price times the number of units used, so dollar volume. Certain things, the higher ones, will be in the Class A. So those things are going to be counted pretty often. Class B is kind of this middle of the road type stuff, and Class C might just be, nails or something like that you weigh rather than actually count individually. And you don't want to waste a whole lot of time on that. People aren't going to be stealing that from you. The supply, your production is not going to grind to a halt if you run out of those. So anyway, you can adjust your counting efforts, to take that into account. So use to establish policies that focus on a few critical items and not the trivial ones. So critical parts would be those A ones, and the trivial ones would be down in the C range. So what you want to do is you want to get, as they've done here in this A category, only 20% of the items are designated A, but they make up 72% of the dollar volume. And then down there, the B items, 30%, and they're 23% of the volume. So we've, only 50% of the items here are in A or B class. But dollar volume, that's what? 95%. And then the bottom 5% are these C items. So 50% of the items do 5% of the dollar volume. So, with a strategy like that, when you've got things segmented like that, now you can go ahead and apply your methods and, come up with your counting scheme of how you're going to do it. So graphically, this is how it looks. Dollar volume on the left, percentage of inventory going across the bottom. You can also boost things up, into a artificial category. Let's say there's some, special order item or something that is truly expensive, but you only use one per assembly. So, it might end up down in the B or the C, but it's pilferable and you don't want it to have problems. So, or it's tough to order. Anyway, you can the ABC works well, but you can look at certain items and use some common sense and boost them up as necessary. So more emphasis on A, obviously, tighter physical control, more care in forecasting. So, you know, again, you go to Sam's or Costco and you order something expensive, it's not going to be out there and, you know, on the floor. It's going to be in some sort of case. You know, those would be the higher priced items. Those would be they may not do a lot of volume of them, so it may not be the best example. But anyway, those are the things that could get pilfered. Good records, obviously. You know, secure stock rooms. We all have stories about places we've worked. You know, it's usually the insider threat. A lot of the shrinkage, you know, people stealing stuff, is actually the employees. You know, you'd be amazed the amount of good products that go out to the dumpster, only to be retrieved later on by somebody else, or, you know, in bars and stuff, all the free drinks going out to the wrong folks. So a lot of that stuff can happen, and controlling the inventory is definitely important. The cycle counting. So the cycle counting would be, you know, when you're actually going to count the stuff. Now with technology, you can see, like in the little graphic here, the guy's got some RFID scanner. And again, like I said, that the power of these RFID devices is they don't need to be these, you know, handheld ones. You can theoretically scan, you know, a whole floor, showroom, from one location, depending on the equipment you've got. So, but anyway, keeping control of the inventory, eliminate shutdown. You know, the annual inventory adjustment. Again, this is, you know, distinct. You probably still need to count everything for taxes. We're talking from an operations management perspective. This is just keeping track. I mean, you can use them for dual purposes, but there still will have to be some sort of tax audit done at some point so you can report that correctly. Trained personnel maintains accurate records. So anyway, very important. So again, you know, since we divided these items up, we're saying that the 8 items are going to be counted every month. B items each quarter, and C items every 6 months. So by doing that, you know, now you can make the most efficient use. Rather than count everything, you know, every quarter, well, these A items now get counted every month, and the C items, you know, not nearly as often. So shrinkage, pilferage, whatever you want to call it, personal selection training, discipline, tight control, effective control. So there's all sorts of, you know, most of them rely somehow on technology. You know, you go to a bar and there's an automatic shot type dispenser. I mean, not so prevalent up here, but you do see them in other places where they want to have a portion control. And also when you go to any of the stores where they have the point of sale items or the RFID, like I said, those can be used for inventory, but they can also be used for theft prevention. Independent versus dependent demand. Basically, if something's going to be part of an assembly, and you know, if one of these pieces or parts is used in conjunction with another item, that would be something that has a dependent demand. Independent demand would be an item that's kind of used, obviously, independently. So, you know, just because one of these is taken from inventory doesn't mean that another part corresponding to that will also be taken. Holding costs. So when you're talking about, you know, why, you know, holding inventory is expensive, holding costs, ordering costs, setup costs, all these type of things, they get involved in how you're going to order inventory and how often you're going to do it. But holding costs would be the warehouse itself, you know, the insurance, possibly the financing, the rest of that. The ordering costs have been reduced greatly, and there's always room for improvement. You know, this where the whole e-procurement and the rest of that, where you have small, efficient ordering processes. Sometimes they're even automated to reduce those ordering costs. Because the problem is, if you have high ordering costs, it's going to drive you to order in larger amounts to, you know, reduce that ordering cost. Well, that's not the solution. The solution is to have smaller amounts of inventory. So the solution is to reduce that ordering cost to the minimum possible. And then setup costs. Setup costs has to do with changeovers and things like that, setting up equipment. Again, you know, when it's ideally software controlled equipment, that's quite easy. You aren't physically moving machines and moving mechanical things. You're just loading on new digital information. So that again, it can be reduced. Holding costs. So again, housing, the actual building, depreciation, all the costs going on that, taxes, insurance, material handling, all the forklift, whatever you have, the labor, the actual warehouseman, the investment costs. So you can see the investment costs, 11%. That's pretty sizable. And then pilferage, space, obsolescence. That's a complete variable. That can change greatly, depending on how loose your operation is run. But anyway, all these holding costs, if you can operate some sort of virtual store where you don't actually take inventory, where you don't actually where you order directly from the manufacturer and it goes straight to the person, then you can get rid of the holding costs. You can get rid of that financing. You have no need for a warehouse. So ideally, that's how people like Amazon have sprung up and gone from nothing to being hugely profitable. Independent models for independent, or inventory models for independent demand. So basic order, economic order quantity. Again, this is a quantitative method to define or decide what is a proper amount to order. But again, it takes into account setup costs and holding costs. And my argument is that reduce the setup costs. Don't just blindly plug in the numbers and say, well, we need to order such and such number of units. No, work to reduce that setup cost so that your economic order quantity gets quite a bit lower. And then quantity discount model, again, usually a false amount. So economic order quantity, yeah, you need fairly constant demand. Lead time, yeah, that would need to be known as well. Instantaneous, quantity discounts are not possible in this case. Variable costs are set up and holding, the only variable cost, and they're trying to avoid stockouts completely. So you end up with the sawtooth type method. And what you would do is, off to the far left there, that's when you've got full inventory. And then inventory is being taken from stock. And at certain points, you can hit that dash line. That's a reorder point. Time is going to pass. And just as you hit the bottom there of the line, your new product arrives. Anyway, and you go through that cycle. So that average inventory, remember from before where they had the average inventory was a quantity divided by 2. Or a quantity divided by 2. So this is one of those graphs that I'm talking about. And you can see the setup costs quite high for small quantities and comes down to some ideal point. Holding costs being rather linear. And so they say look at the the valley there and pick a point on there. My argument is fix that setup cost, because you can see holding costs are going to keep decreasing. So get the setup cost down to where it's an automated process, where it's either it can even be automatic. For example, we talked about Walmart and Pampers or something. When things are taken off the shelf due to the RFIDs, Procter & Gamble knows enough to send that product. Well, they can send them, very small items, and it very small amounts, and it works out much better. So, anyway, quantity discount price or models, reduced prices available in large quantities of purchase. Trade-offs between product costs and decreased holding costs. Might even be more trade-offs. If it's something that's going obsolete, obviously they're going to try and push it. If something new's coming out, you don't want to be the retailer that's stuck with the old product when the competition's got something new, even if you got a good deal on it. Anyway, there's business decisions throughout, but usually people underestimate the amount, the cost of holding inventory. Total setup costs. So quantity discount models. Here they're looking, all things being equal in just a linear format here. Discount price is if you're ordering less than 1,000 is $5, 1,000 in $19.99, $4.80, and then 2,000 or over you can get it for $475. And so you would look at the item. Now, what's going to take into account here is your holding costs. So you're going to see the formula is going to give you these different graphs based upon the total order cost and the order quantity. So you can see the price breaks, and you can see the curves relative to the numbers ordered. So what they've done here is they've looked at the different, price levels. They've looked at their holding costs. They factored that in there. So their holding cost is $480 in this case, in the best case, and that gives them a total of $24,725. So when you do the math across, in this case, they're going to come up with a solution to buy 1,000 units at that point. I do this stuff all the time, and in fact, I carry more inventory than I want to, but mine, again, the shipping cost, if I can fill a trailer, it's such a discount. Plus, if I pick up from the factory, I get another 5% off. So there's other factors. I mean, nothing's in absolutes, but just be, you should be aware that most of the time when you're buying in large quantities, it's not the best method. Okay, moving on to aggregate planning. So aggregate planning, meet forecasted demand while minimizing cost over the planning period. So what's that mean? Well, we get back to these planning horizons, and again, what's pretty consistent is short-range plans are going to be under 3 months, right? You've got certain things you can do in there, but not much. You can just adjust the help that you have. You bring on new people, you're going to be training them up, you're going to be wasting time. You kind of got to deal with what you got. You might be able to schedule overtime and do things like that. And typically that's where frontline people are involved. Mid-term guys, they're saying 3 months to 18 months, this intermediate. You can make some changes. You can certainly bring on new staff. You can do some subcontracting, but again, sometimes there's some problems with that. And you can make some more, I wouldn't call them strategic changes, but you can at least make some changes since you're not necessarily putting out a fire. And then long range, you can actually build new buildings. You can think big. They show that only top executives are involved in long range plans. Top executives may be involved in that, certainly, because the financial practices and they the sums of money we're talking about, and they can't afford to have be down there on the front lines nor do they want to. But the top executives are also going to have rather junior people working for them, doing the work, sort of the action people, and they're just reviewing. Anyway, those are different planning horizons. What happens when you're looking at aggregate planning is in short range type stuff, what can you do? If you're carrying inventories, you can, let's say demand changes a bit, you can use the inventories as sort of a crutch to take care of that. Not ideal. A company that's not doing that, a company that's not carrying inventory, is going to be more efficient, so you're putting yourself at a bit of a disadvantage. Accommodate changes by varying the workforce size. I mean, when you start monkeying with people hiring and firing or cutting hours, that can be a problem. Part-timers, overtime, idle time. Again, you run people too hard in overtime, or just get them out of their expectation zone. I mean, some people, again, if it's seasonal type work, they may expect that. But if you get a typical office worker and you want to push them out to a 12-hour day, that may not be what they signed up for. So anyway, it's anytime you can minimize the disruption on the HR element, you're better off. Subcontractors, you bring in subcontractors, you may be bringing in competition, like I said. And change prices, other factors to influence demand. Seasonally, let's say you're selling farm equipment or something, when the farmers get paid, that's when they're buying equipment. But say, you're making equipment year round, And in the dead of winter, when nobody's thinking about buying equipment, that may be when you have the sales to try and balance out that demand. So they're going to go through these one by one. So changing inventory levels. You're kind of filling the tank when you're in a low demand time, and then you're drawing from that tank. You're drawing down the inventory. But it increases the cost, storage, insurance, handling, obsolescence. If you're always carrying inventory, that can be a bit of a problem. And then when you run out, lost sales. Varying the workforce size, matching it exactly. Yeah, so these training separation costs, laying off workers. Again, when you lay off workers, it doesn't affect just the people who are being laid off, it affects the whole staff. Varying the production rate. You can do that with certain, but again, based upon their expectations. Again, as people get more involved in their lives, and especially in, where the norm is both parents working, people have children, they may not be able to do that. Subcontracting exposes customers to possible competitor again. And it may certainly be costly. Part-time workers can work in certain things, but it's got to be an unskilled type thing. Certain companies use it, like say UPS. They'll hire everybody during the Christmas rush and then just lay off everybody except for the cream of the crop. So they use it as like a recruitment tool to get the best people. That can work. Looks like a John Deere type plow there. Anyway, they would certainly have the specials during the slack times of the season. Back ordering. If you go to the store, if you go to the manufacturer, you go to the sales people and they say, yeah, well, we can get you that, but it's going to take 6 months. Things like iPhones or whatever, they try and have a bit of scarcity just to generate demand. But when you're truly out of the product and you need that product, usually people are going to go someplace else. Counter seasonal is kind of an ideal utopia type thing where you come up with products that have different seasons. Again, the one that they always show is the snow machine type thing versus the jet ski, which is reasonable, or the people doing dirt work in the summer and snow plowing in the winter. Anyway, so these are these options. We've kind of talked through them all already. Subcontracting, part-time workers, influencing demand, back ordering, counter seasonal. Different strategies. This chase strategy, match output rates to demand forecast for each period. Vary workforce levels with production rates. Yeah, service organizations may vary because a lot of times they're using unskilled. So again, this won't work in a dentist office type thing because they're certainly more skilled, but maybe in a restaurant they can do that. But varying the workforce levels in most organizations is not a good idea. Level strategy. This is being very friendly to the workers, but if it drives a company out of business, then that's ultimately puts the employees in a worse spot. But trying to keep the production uniform, using inventory as a buffer. But like anything else, a mixed strategy may be the best. Here's where they're showing, where this is the demand line, right? And here they're doing this level production. I'm sorry, the demand line is this erratic line. Level production is this dotted line going across. So here, it's the winter. Not a whole lot of construction going on. Demand's lower, but they're basically going to be filling the warehouse with this excess production, and they're going to need it though, because during the summer months, demand is way up here and production's still down here level. So, roofing supplies, stuff doesn't change too much. Certainly not over the course of the year, so that might work. But depends on the product being produced. So services, yeah, flexibility of individual worker skills, flexibility of rate and output of hours. So again, flexibility on the in services, and again, services can be quite broad. In general, less skilled, but there are many in the service industries where that are high-paid professionals that it doesn't apply to. Restaurants, smoothing production process, optimal workforce size. So again, if you've ever been a server or whatever, you weren't off, doing backup tasks or cleaning things or doing stuff like that in the middle of the busiest time, busiest shift. But those may be done before and after the big rushes to give you, enough hours to make it work. Hospitals and also public safety type things, they're kind of stuck. They got to be there. They usually have more people on hand than they need, but that's kind of the nature of it. So they can respond as necessary. National chains of small service firms, yeah. When it's done at the national level, again, this gets away from the quality bit about decentralized management, which is usually a good thing. Both decentralized management and execution typically are a bit better. Miscellaneous services. So, management, plan human resources. Not much to say there. We'll talk a little bit about airline industry. The deal with the airlines is there's a concept called yield management that explains how they basically maximize profits and why the prices are different because they basically segmented the market. So huge, very, very competitive industry. Overall, the industry loses money. There's individual companies that make money, but there's so many companies that go out of business. It's very tough, very competitive. You got weather, you got fuel costs, you got other things, a lot of variables that makes it tough. And resources spread throughout the entire system. So anyway, what you want to do is you want to come up with this yield management strategy that the airlines are using, and if that can be applied to other areas, it can make businesses that are marginally profitable hugely profitable just by different pricing strategies. Ideally, for yield management, there's certain attributes about the product. Service product can be sold in advance of consumption, like an airline ticket. Demand fluctuates. Obviously, as you know, people travel in spurts based upon holidays and other items. Capacity is relatively fixed. Airlines, they only have a certain number of seats. They can't add seats during busier periods, and only to a very limited extent. Demand can be segmented. You get business travelers, you get tourists, you get different folks. You get certain people that are very price sensitive, and other people it's like, I'm not paying for the ticket. Just buy it. So you've got the same people on the same airplane, more than willing to pay hugely different prices. Variable costs are low and fixed costs are high. So again, an airplane, if you put more people on it, it doesn't really cost much more. Slightly more in fuel, but just slightly. It's going to be largely the same. So this is kind of yield management, how it's explained. There's some other videos. Maybe I'll put them on next week just to show you. But Priceline and some of these other guys explain a little bit about how yield management works. But let's say, you've got a room in a hotel and you're going to charge $150 for it, right? Everybody pays $150, the tourist and the business traveler. Well, the business traveler may be willing to pay more for that ticket. Again, perception of most business travelers is, yeah, I'm not paying for it, just whatever it costs. And the tourist, he may be, I'm not going to take that trip, or I'm going to find someplace else. So in this case, they sell all of their rooms for $150, and the number that they sell totals up to $6,750. So the variable costs were that $15 and the rest wasn't the variable costs were only $15, so it's not that significant. Now you get to this pricing strategy where you have a two-tiered pricing type thing. You've got $100 rooms and $200 rooms. Okay, so by having a $100 room, maybe the guy needs to buy it beforehand. Maybe he needs to, go through some different hoops to get that price. But you may bring some tourists back into the traveling realm. And the business travelers, whether they pay $150 or $200, again, a lot of them may not care, so you're not necessarily going to lose any of those customers, or very few. So the total revenue you brought in is now up to $8,100 just by having two tiers. Now, as you know, when you buy airline tickets, there's a whole lot more tiers than this, but that's the basic concept, is selling the same item but for two different prices. And it works best when people don't know. You don't want people on the airline, it's just considered kind of rude or impolite to ask somebody how much they paid for their seat. So the airlines are on board with that because they don't want people sharing that information, and they're happy to have everybody do it. Ryanair, I showed you that one. I had that one video early on. It's kind of funny, and Ryanair is sort of like Southwest, but on steroids, where they have very, very cheap fares, but they have all these excess or extra fees involved. So I'll try and load up the price line and the yield management videos. They aren't testable or anything, but they are kind of interesting, and it explains this concept pretty well. But £10 is like $15, for an airfare. But, if you use a credit card, they charge you. If you want to check a bag, they always charge you. Your carry-on, none of this, big old roller duffel thing. It can weigh 10 kilos, like 22 pounds. And they have a credit card machine and a scale right there. They have all these ads where you have to type in something about Crest just to move on. So you're just bombarded every step of the process. Anyway, white as well as professionals is what you have to type in there just to get. It's just annoying. But if you want to travel for £10, that's what you're going to do. And then you end up with these prices that are quite a bit more. And especially if you buy last minute, they'll go up just like the others. But they definitely segment the market, and they are very profitable. Rental car companies do this as well. Again, depending on demand. And again, rental car companies, they try to make a bit of money by upcharging you. They'll give you a decent rate, but then, in Anchorage, for example, well, you want snow tires, don't you? Well, that's going to be a little more. You want, insurance, whatever, but again, you can get them for they are for $750. So, just depends on the timing, and the normal rates would be a bit higher. So, again, without the videos and without the class discussion, we can't really do yield management. It's due, but I'll put those videos on so you can see it. But you can see up in this quadrant, these are the items that really are, the vendors employ yield management. Tend to be predictable, just like we said. Price tends to be variable, so duration of use and price. But you'll see other, segments trying to work it out to where they can also sell their tickets in yield management, say for movies. Hospitals, that's a bit of a stretch, but restaurants, you see them, especially with their, again, discount cards. If you buy in bulk $100 worth, you can get a 25% discount. So again, it's the same meal, but there's different prices for different customers. So it all works out. It needs to at least have the appearance of being fair and logical to the customers. You need to be able, it's incumbent upon the airlines right now, even if you look a year out, the tickets for whatever event, whatever day, they have to know what's going on. If there's some major event that's going to cause a lot of air traffic, like for example, spring break 3 years from now, those tickets are probably already astronomical because they know everybody during the spring is limited to that 1 week, those numbers will go up. And they also have to keep track of changes in demand. But it can get pretty complex. You look at a date like Valentine's Day, February 14th, where it's a date and not a day of the week. Depending on where that falls on a weekend, where that falls midweek, that can affect things like airfare, the amount of people who would travel. But if it's midweek, not so much. So anyway, that is this C-class items. This is just the video type thing. Relates back to what we talked about. So again, all the homework. This is in about 4 different places now, but it should all be the same information, regardless of which source you look at. All right, so that's probably long enough for this particular video. I'm going to go ahead and stop this one, and then we'll do a